honor and a pleasure to be able to share some words of Torah. Always a good thing. Not a big fan of titles, you might know, so we kind of kept it short. The title for this evening's Shiur, or today's Shiur, is Lashon Hora. I hope it wasn't too short, and I don't need to clarify that we're not all here to speak Lashon Hora. We're here to speak about Lashon Hora, the next best thing. And of course, we have the two parshas this week, Tazria and Metzora. And at the center of the parshas, you know, there's things before and after, but obviously will occupy center stage of Tazria and Metzora are all the details of Tzaras, and very detailed indeed, this type of Tzaras, that type. But the moral of the story for our purposes is that Tzaras comes as a punishment for certain dysfunctional behaviors and practices, and foremost amongst them, as we know, is Lashon Hora. It leads the pack. There are others also, but Lashon Hora really, again, gets most of the credit for Tzaras. So much so that Metzora is looked upon as a notarikon, as a contracted form of Motzi Shemra ad kedei kach. So the name Metzora itself is associated with Motzi Shemra. And I want to talk about the driver, shall we say, for Lashon Hora. Officially, it's a mystery. Why would a person speak Lashon Hora? And people do, and where does it come from? And maybe if we identify where it comes from, so then we're one step on the road to maybe try and fixing it up a little bit. So of course, not hard to imagine, not hard to understand that the driver, or the primary driver for Lashon Hora, is gaiva. That means that a person feels they're better than everyone else, and then hence they point out everyone else's flaws, weaknesses, and deficiencies. And this idea, according to Rashi, that gaiva stands at the root of Lashon Hora, is actually also in the beginning of Parshas Metzora, because as we know, when the Metzora starts his recovery, so he brings a certain Tahara kit, Tahara package of certain things. You've got the cedar wood, and you've got the hyssop, and you've got the silk thread, and what's happening there? And as Rashi says, you have the problem and the antidote. One of the items is the cedar wood, erez, and then another is the azov, right, this low shrub, this hyssop. And Rashi says that's his problem. He thinks he's as high as a cedar tree. He thinks he's as tall as a cedar. Maybe what he could do with is a bit of lowering himself to become more like a shrub. And also the shnitolas, which is the silk thread, also that silk is from a worm. So he needs to be headed a bit more in the right direction to fix things up. He's a little bit too high for himself. He needs to lower himself. And that basically is Rashi informing us through these mitzvos that at the heart of Lashon Hora, again, not surprisingly, lies gaiva. and then the way out of it is really to find a path towards another. Okay, that all sounds very good. Easier said than done, as we know. But we have to try and find a way in here. So firstly, how does it express itself? Again, to ask what is hopefully not an overly simple question. How does the gaiva express itself in Lashon Hora? So I want to share with you a few words from the Rambam. You know, the Rambam sometimes at the end of one of these sets of the halachas, when he's finished, so to speak, with the business part of things, you know, passing the halachas, he ends off with something of like a musar conclusion. And the end of the Rambam's discussion of Hilchos Tzaras is about remembering what happened with Miriam. Miriam spoke about Moshe, and she got punished. And then the Rambam begins to make this kal v'chomer, as I'm sure you know. If already Miriam, and she's his sister, and she brought him up, and she knows him from way back when, and she didn't mean it badly. And at the end of the day, all she said was that he's a Navi like all other Nevi'im. which is, there's worse things to say about people. But even then she got punished because that's considered Lashon Hora. So says Rambam, Kal v'chomer. You know what Miriam's episode is there for? It's not to feel sorry for Miriam. It's to learn from her and to learn a Kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer livnei Adam. So all the more so for those people, and hear these next 5 or 6 words. Kal v'chomer for people, harishaim hatipshim, who are wicked people, who are foolish people, shemarbim ledaber gedolos v'neflaos, who speak a lot of great and wondrous things.
Why do you want to break the computer? I'm sorry, Cookie.
I have no idea what just happened. Anyway, so continuing, once again, back to the Rambam. Again, get back to where we were. The Rambam says, so if Miriam was punished for speaking Lashon Hora, then Kal v'chomer, those Rishaim Hatipshim, right, the wicked and foolish people, Shemarbim Ledaber Gedolos V'niflaos. That is the Rambam's depiction of Lashon Hora. Gedolos V'niflaos. What does Gedolos mean? Great things. What does Niflaos mean? Wondrous things. And that is the Rambam's characterization of Lashon Hora. Wow. I have to say, it doesn't sound too bad. Most people like people to say great and wonderful things about them. It's got to be the least intuitive way you could imagine that you would describe Lashon Hora. I mean, if you met someone and they said, "Oh, we were just talking about you." What did you say? Oh, we said great and wonderful things. That's good. And the Rambam says, those are markers for Lashon Hora. Why is Lashon Hora called Gedolos V'niflaos? That's the first question. And the second question is, the Rambam, not only does he call people who speak Lashon Hora Rishoim, remember, he also calls them Tipshim. Not only are they wicked people, they're also foolish people. And once again, you have to be careful with your terms. I can understand that they're wicked people. That's not nice to speak Lashon Hora. But why are they foolish people? In other words, maybe they're smart, and sometimes people are only wicked because they are smart. Wherein lies the foolishness? Where's the tipshus of Lashon Hora? And the answer to these questions will give us the first insight as to how Gaiva leads a person to Lashon Hora. After all, a lot of Lashon Hora that people say, what does it come from? What is it based on? Well, they'll tell you it's based on facts. But what does that mean it's based on facts? It's based on something that they've seen. But isn't it so often true that someone who speaks Lashon Hora, they may take one fact and they may broaden that to represent the entire picture. They may see something happen once and they're sure it happens the whole time. They may see one thing happen and assume, yeah, well, if that happened, then I'm pretty sure that all these sorts of other things happened, and their description, which they consider to be factual, grows and grows. And that is why the Rambam, the first of the two words that the Rambam uses to describe Lashon Hora is gedolos, great things. Why is Lashon Hora called great things? Because it is expanded all too often way in excess of what you saw. Because what you saw is not really grounds for a story, right? The story comes when you build it out, you bulk it out into a much bigger thing. And you're sure that all those bigger things are true, even though all you ever saw was one piece of the puzzle. Who is a fool? Even a smart person can be a fool if he doesn't realize that he doesn't know as much as he thinks he does. A person who is sure of knowledge with no basis is a fool in that area. Good. And And once again, that's why the first thing about Lashon Hora is that if I saw this isolated piece of the picture, I'm pretty sure I've got the whole picture. But where does that certainty come from? It comes from Gaiva, because Gaiva bloats a person's sense of what they feel they know. They're always sure of everything. It's definitely this. It's for sure this. That comes from nothing other than Gaiva. That's called gedolos. And that's the first point of foolishness within Lashon Hora. If you were ever pinned to the wall and asked, well, what did you actually see? It would really be a fraction of the story that you told, because your Gaiva led you to foolishness to venture into this area of a much bigger picture, which you have no idea really whether it actually exists. And from gedolos, we move to the second term, niflaos. Again, niflaos doesn't sound too bad. But what does nifla mean? Nifla means something that's covered. Ki yipale, something that's restricted from you. Mufla is mechusa, Rashi says. It means covered. And what does that mean? It means even in the thing that you saw, you never really know the full circumstances behind that episode. And moreover, you never really know what's going on inside the person to be able to attach the characteristic that you so confidently provide. But if you're a Baal Gaiva, you proceed into the realms of foolishness and assume that you know everything about the situation. Having seen one thing from the outside, you assume that you know everything on the inside. Once again, that's tipshus. You don't know what's going on inside the person. It could change things greatly. You certainly discard that from your story. And therefore, the first point of Gaiva is most Lashon Hora tales are full of foolishness because they're full of inflating the story, both in terms of magnitude and in terms of quality, assuming that we know things that we haven't seen and aspects of the person that are inaccessible to us. And therefore, a lot of the road to modifying Lashon Hora is remembering that if you're smart, you know what you can't know. A smart person knows what they can't know. They know what they've seen, and they know what they don't know about what that represents in terms of the broader picture. And that, I would say, reality check, which is also part of humility, because humility is recognizing what you don't know. And then that's step number one for recovery. The road back to wisdom is making sure that you don't extrapolate, not in terms of quantity or quality, things that you couldn't possibly meaningfully know. That recognition, that's a good another recognition. But there is a certain point, I'm sure you've all heard about this idea. It's always like a bit of a mystery in terms of the driver for, that's to say, the drive to speak Lashon Hora. After all, here we are saying that for persons of Baal Gaiva, they feel they're better than everyone else. Okay, let's say that's true. But still the question is, okay, but why do you have to talk about the fact that they're not better than you? In other words, there's many things that you may know about yourself. Okay, good for you. So you know them. You don't have to talk about the fact that someone else doesn't have them. You see, there's a second step. It's not enough that a person has a sense of their own greatness. It still needs to be understood as to why they feel impelled to point out other people's weaknesses. If you know where you live, you don't spend the whole day talking about where other people live. You know what you know, and that's that. But the point is, we see very often that Gaiva, there's a bit of a paradox with Gaiva. On the one hand, Gaiva is a person who thinks they're amazing, but it comes with a lot of inferiority. It comes with a lot of insecurity. The very same person who feels they're so much better than everyone else also feels that they're really not doing that well. And the question is, how do these things go together? After all, they seem to ask it in a very obvious way, but they seem to be a contradiction. How does insecurity and arrogance go together? But I think the point is like this. The point is that a certain part of a Baal Gaiva that has them, they like to feel, or they naturally feel that they're better than everyone else. They're on a higher level and they're more perfect, etc. That's one part of them. But there is another part of them. It's not true. In other words, they can't completely shut off their cognitive faculties, which realize that the reality doesn't fit that picture. That means that there's some part of a person which recognizes that the level that they'd like to feel that they're at, they're not really there. They're missing a lot. And that now is a conflict. They'd like to be on that level. They'd like to think that they're at that level, but they know that they're not. So now what happens? That's where the insecurity comes. Insecurity is feeling that you're not at the level where you portray yourself to be, because that's an impossibly high level. And if you recognize that, so then you will feel haughty and insecure all at the same time. So what's the antidote there? What's the solution? The solution is that you try and fuel that narrative. You try and close the gap from where you know that you're not really all the way up there, because you know that you're kind of actually really here, which is where you really are. You try and move up there relatively by pushing everyone down. That's where the compulsion comes from, because you've got to propel yourself upwards, at least to have your observations of the world around you allow you to fit into the place, that elevated level that you'd like to feel that you are. And that's drive and insecurity go together, and not only insecurity, but the drive to really prey on other people's shortcomings, so that you really do feel that you have a level that this part of me that knows that's not even really true. And basically what it means is that the only way that you can sustain your presentation, or even your self-perception, is by a negative perception of others. That's a bit of a sad situation, but I think that's really what is happening. You know, I wonder if you've ever heard of this idea. It was before your time, and I know that's true because it was even before my time, but there is a concept, a psychological concept, which is called being okay. And there's a famous book which is called I'm Okay, You're Okay. And basically, to be okay means that you essentially have there is a famous book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. There you go. Short titles, they always work, and it rhymes. So, and what does it mean? To be okay means to have a fundamentally affirmed sense of self-worth. And of course, the point of the book, and everyone needs to be okay. It's very important to feel that you're okay. And the ideal situation is I'm okay, you're okay, meaning I'm happy with who I am, I'm happy with who you are. And by the way, that's an absolutely correct situation. I didn't read the book. I think the cover pretty much sums it up. But in any case, that is what it means to I'm okay, you're okay. So what is Lashon Hora? Of course, the opposite of that is I'm not okay, you're not okay, no one's okay. All right, let's not go there. Obviously, that's highly dysfunctional. But then Lashon Hora is different. You see, Lashon Hora is not just saying I'm okay and you're not okay. It's more than that. It's saying I'm okay because you're not okay. In other words, my okayness is built on your not okayness. And that is how I kind of go through life. I'm able to sustain a very high perception of myself because I have such a low perception of everyone else. Of course, that's why the insecurity part of Gaiva will push a person to harp on these faults, and that's what comes out as Lashon Hora. And that becomes the mystery now of the way that we see other people. You know, it's amazing how perceptive and blind we can be all at the same time. I'll tell you something interesting. We just finished a few weeks ago the parshas dealing with the Big Day Kahuna, and the Gemara says that Big Day Kahuna, right, the 8 begodim of the Kohen Gadol, as we know, they're like korbanos, right? There's a smichos parshios, so the Big Day Kahuna are next to korbanos, and just like korbanos are mechaper, so too the Big Day Kahuna are mechaper. And actually the Gemara then goes through each one and says what it's a kapara for. Okay, So le'inyanenu, when it gets to the me'il, so you know the me'il is that garment of tcheles, and it's got bells and pomegranates at the bottom, and the Gemara says that when the Kohen Gadol wears the me'il, that atones for the chet of Lashon Hora. Okay, the Yavo Dover Shebekol, right? Because when he walks, so the bells chime. So that's that. So let the sound of the bells chiming come and be mechaper for the sound of Lashon Hora. There you go. That's the Gemara. The wearing of the me'il atones for Lashon Hora. As you can appreciate, there's a little bit more to it than that, because it cannot be that everyone can just basically speak Lashon Hora, and as long as the Kohen Gadol is wearing his me'il, we should be fine. You know, there's a concept in English, it's called say by the bell. Not sure if you've ever heard it. It's famous in boxing. In any case, that's really what's happening. You're saved by the bell, whereas here you are, you're a lot of trouble for Lashon Hora, but as long as the Kohen is, you know, ding-a-linging along, as long as the Kohen Gadol's wardrobe is in order, everything's in order. Clearly, that's not true. So what does it mean when it says that these garments, they are mechaper for these averos? Says one of the great later Rishon in the Akedas Yitzchak, written by Rav Yitzchak Arama, the late 1400s, when the Gemara says that the Big Day Kahuna are mechaper for these averos, it means this is a lesson, each of these Big Day Kahuna. If you take that lesson, you're on the road to atonement. Because if you learn the lesson and you avoid the sin, so then you get part of the kapara. So what's the lesson from the me'il? Says the Akedas Yitzchak. Remember, as we said a moment ago, at the hem of the me'il are bells and pomegranates. That's a very interesting combination. I don't think we would naturally associate that. You can try it. Say to someone, what do you think when you hear the word bells? What do you think? If they say pomegranates, they're cheating. But why are the two next to each other? Says the Akedas Yitzchak. What's a bell? A bell is something that sounds off. And what's the lesson for pomegranates? Says the Gemara, based on the pasuk in Shiur Shirim, the Jewish people are like pomegranates, full of mitzvahs. Afilu reikonim shebi Yisrael, based on the pasuk in Shiur Shirim, kefelach harimon rakasech. Afilu reikonim shebi Yisrael, even the empty among Yisrael are malayim mitzvahs karim, and they're full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So what's the point? The point is, next to every bell is a pomegranate. To remind you that next time you ring your bell and next time you make noise about someone, remember they're a pomegranate. Remember that they're full of mitzvahs, because you seem to be missing all of that if you're speaking Lashon Hora. But we need to go a little deeper here. What does it mean that even those who are empty among Israel, afilu reikonim shebi Yisrael, meleim mitzvahs kariman? After all, I mean, I'll ask a very simple shaila, but you know, if they're full of mitzvahs, why are you calling them empty? And if they're empty, well, how can you say that they're full of mitzvahs? I mean, I think that's a fair question. I mean, this is without getting into the famous question of, you know, is it half full or is it half empty? That's bad enough. But to be completely empty and also full at the same time, that takes some doing. What does the Gemara mean when it says that even those who are empty among Yisrael are full of mitzvahs, like a pomegranate? But the point is that very often there are people who, they are full of good things, but when we look at them, we see an empty person. In other words, somehow we bypass all their positive qualities, focus only on their negative qualities, and then build up the entire person from those negative things until all there is emptiness. It's amazing. Because on the one hand, it's very keen observation, right? You notice their faults very keenly, and then it's an absolute blindness with regards to all of their positive points until the entire person is then built from the ground up, building out from those negative points. The whole person is empty. And that's why he can be full and you see them as empty. But what does that mean? It means that in almost all cases, there are negative and positive things to every person. It's really up to you as to what do you see when you look at that person. Because if the person is positive and negative, and you look at them and you see only negative, that is more a statement about you than it is about them. Because the fair assessment would be that they have both. And the nice thing to do is to focus on the positive. But if all you can see is the negative, then that is a flaw in your vision. And why would that be? Why would you only see the negative? Because you have no choice. You have no choice but to define people negatively in order to maintain your impossibly high positive perception of yourself. And that's why, in the end, you're only okay because everyone else is not okay. And that's really where the problem of Lashon Hora comes from. I'll tell you something very interesting. I wonder if you've ever heard this idea. And it's mentioned in Rishonim, in the Sefer Chovos HaLevavos, and also in the Sefer Hasidim, 2 works of Rishonim. It's just like a baffling thing. But these Rishonim say that it is possible that in the future, when a person comes, in the world of reward, they will find that they will be rewarded for certain mitzvahs that they never did. And upon inquiring as to how could this be, you got to be truthful in the Olam HaEmes, and you got to say, it's a great mitzvah, I didn't do it. So what will they say? No, you didn't do this, but so and so did this mitzvah, and they spoke Lashon Hora about you, so that's why you get that mitzvah. That's I don't know what to say about that. It's kind of nice for you, not nice for them. And the same is true for Averos. Person may receive Averos and they're pretty sure they never did them. And then they'll be told, yeah, but you spoke Lashon Hora about that person. And that's why you get these Averos from them. It's just, it's hard to know what to say. You never find this about anything else. And how does it work? And why is it so? So, of course, sorry. The understanding is like this. What I mean to say is it can be understood on many levels, which is a polite way of saying I don't really understand it at any level beyond this following basic level, but it's the one that's most meaningful for us. And that is that, how can it be? It's just like an incredible thing that if you speak Lashon Hora about someone, so then they get some of your mitzvahs and you get some of their averos. Where does that come from? It's just, okay, it's a punishment, but how does the punishment fit the crime? But I think now we understand that very often if a person really speaks Lashon Hora, to a chronic degree, it's in order to allow their own righteous level to continue, but because it's fueled by all the wrong things that people around them are doing. In other words, what we've been discussing over the last few moments is in order for a person to see themselves as a tzaddik, they need to see everyone else as a rasha. In order for them to be committed to doing the right thing, it's based on having seen other people do the wrong thing and fixating on that. Ultimately, it turns out, therefore, that that's a person that by the time they're finished, they will have done mitzvahs, but those mitzvahs are a product of other people's averos. They were only inspired to do these mitzvahs because you see, I'm so much better than them. So their averos contributed to your mitzvah. But if their averos contributed to your mitzvahs, then number one, the people who did those averos deserve some of your mitzvahs, and you deserve some of their averos because they helped you. It's an amazing insight into this idea. And therefore, should we ask, even just on the most basic level, so what's the way forward? We say often that Shmiras HaLashon, people undertake Shmiras HaLashon, but it's not about what you say. It ends up about what you say, but it's not about deciding to speak or not to speak. Okay, because if you try and do that, so then you are a Lashon Hora time bomb. If you don't address all the things that lead into Lashon Hora, so then it was only a matter of time before you will just explode. Or because I'm addressing mostly English people, I should say you will implode. But the result is the same. Shmiras Halashon begins with the way that you see things. What you see is what you'll speak about. You'll say negative things if you see negatively, which means that you've really got to start with the way that you look at people. But amazingly, and that's really, I think, is the chiddush of what we're discussing this evening, amazingly, the way that you see people is a function of the way you see yourself. And should we ask, and I saw someone just raised the question, tachlis, what can a person do? I think one very basic thing to do, as strange as it sounds, is for a person to be more comfortable with exactly how they are. And that really is what anova is. Yeah, novo, it's obviously, it's a fallacy, the idea that anova is you make yourself less than what you are. Anova is knowing exactly what you are and being okay with what you are, recognizing your weaknesses and resolving to work on them, recognizing your strengths and using them productively, recognizing where they came from and where they should be headed to. All of that's real, and that is 100% anova. And the more you are prepared to relax a little bit and get down from the cedar tree of that falsely elevated sense of where you are and be just a bit more down to where you really are, the more at home you are with who you are, the more you will allow in the positive aspects of the people around you, and you'll be freed. I mean, that's the liberation, right? You'll be freed from having to harp on people's negative points, because you don't need to do that to finance a level that doesn't exist. You're happy with a level that does exist, obviously happy to work on it, ready to work on it, but you no longer have that. You're freed from that compulsion. I mean, that is the original freedom of speech. It means you free up your speech from having to be diverted to Lashon Hora. And again, easier said than done, but it is a direction, and it's not light years away. It's close at hand. And perhaps let's conclude with another very interesting idea. And again, it relates to Gaiva, I would say. You see, what's interesting about Lashon Hora is that it's about putting people down, putting people in their place, and so on and so forth. But isn't it interesting that what people are compelled to do through speech, they would never do through action? In other words, you would never physically put a person down. You would never physically hurt a person. And yet, there is that appeal to doing so through Lashon Hora. What is the difference between them? But the answer is, it's a matter of Gaiva, in the sense that the difference between the physical act and speech is that speech is a much more elevated thing. And there's a certain aspect of a person that is only really defined by the faculty of speech, as we know. Nefesh chaya, ruach mamalala. That's a uniquely human faculty, and it's very close to. It's as close as a human being gets in expressing themselves in the way that relates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why, as we've mentioned in the past, it's just a parenthetical comment, but that's why the halachas of what you speak about on Shabbos are so chomor. Okay, nish Shabbos garet, as I'm sure you've heard me say, should be absent from anyone's vocabulary. It certainly should not be the beginning of the sentence. Maybe as the end of the sentence. Maybe the entire sentence is fine, because one doesn't speak about malacha on Shabbos. And the Yerushalmi says, because from a certain point of view, if we rest on Shabbos from malacha to resemble Hashem, so to speak, or to emulate Hashem, Hashem created the world through speech. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam. And therefore, speaking about malacha on Shabbos, although for a human being it's less, but it's actually more like the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. So speaking is a very, very elevated faculty. And that's part of the appeal. Again, the Gaiva appeal. This is the third aspect that I wanted to speak about, even just briefly. The third element of appeal of Lashon Hora is that you're able to use, through this very elevated faculty to use that to put people down. You'd never use your fists. You'd never use your arms. I mean, nowadays everyone's using their elbows, but in a nice way. But you'd never physically harm a person because that's beneath you. It's beneath you because it's a lower part of you. But the most elevated part of you, to be able to destroy someone or to put them in their place without even moving, but just by speaking, it's a very empowering thing for a Balgaiva to feel that they have that power. And what's interesting is the power of speech is a great thing. It is a powerful thing. And it's a powerful thing that should be used productively. You know, one of the korbanos that the Mitzvah brings is the korban osham. I'm not going to get too much into the details of the korbanos. I don't want to throw anyone into trauma, and it is Sunday after all. But an osham is a guilt offering, and the Mitzvah brings an osham, and the Seforno says, you know what type of osham this is? It's like another type of osham, asham me'ila. You know what me'ila is? When you take something holy and you use it for something mundane or profane or worse, that's called me'ila. Says the Sforno, that's what a person has done to the faculty of speech. He took something that's so elevated that should be used to connect with others and to elevate with others, and to use it only to distance himself from others and others from each other and to lower them. And that is me'ila. That's taking a holy faculty and using it for a very unholy purpose. That's its own type of crime. And once again, therefore, should we look for a practical strategy, one could say, as to, you know, how do I get out of this? To recall that the things that we say are very powerful. And the greatest kavod is to use them in a way that brings kavod to people, in a way that gives life to people, not takes it away from people. You can be extremely influential with the things that you say. To use it for a positive, there is no more empowering thing. And that really is the Yisem Kilokim, that really is the Halachta B'drachav. So I think these are things that they're always worthwhile thinking about. And again, not just about Shmir Lashon to say Lashon Hora is bad, but to understand where it comes from and how we can, maybe the way that we look at ourselves and understand how that affects with the way we look at others can maybe try and take a step out of the direction of Lashon Hora. And if it's always important, I would say that it's doubly so now. Many of us are in situations where all we have is words from a certain point of view. You know, practically we're limited depending on where you are. That depends on how long they're going to keep restrictions. But you always have words, and your words can make a big difference. Your words can make a big difference to a person who would like to hear from you, or a person who would just, you can raise a person up and you can connect people with each other. And I think of all the lessons that we're trying to learn from this very, very unusual time, it's the power of the spoken word, because at certain stages, that's all we have. And I hope that in Mitzvah Hashem, B'Korov, when we all get out of this, so as we leave the privacy, or the enforced privacy of our quarantines and of our cabins and of whatever, we shouldn't leave behind the appreciation that we had of what words can do, how they can be used for good. And this, I think, is the positive message from Shmir Lashon, not just to sit there saying nothing and refrain from speaking Lashon Hara, to recognize the power of speech and how it could be used in a good way to connect people, to raise people up, and Mitzvah Hashem, through that, to always be sure that we're okay with other people being okay. We don't need them to be not okay. For us to be, yes, okay, we should be okay, they should be okay, and we should be zoche through this, another important zechus, to be zoche for besuras tovos bekarov. Thank you very much for joining this evening. I can see some familiar names. I didn't bring my attendance sheet, but it's a pleasure to be sharing Divrei Torah with you, and should all besuras tovos bekarov, all the very best.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Rav Bernstein.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure, pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure, pleasure.
Is it okay if the recording is sent out
Who did we send out to?
to the people that couldn't make it from our database? Or
Sure, pleasure, pleasure, of course.
Thank you so much, Rav Bernstein.
Okay, Shiur, all the best and regards to your dad.
This was a lot of chizuk. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, take care.